Hi everyone, and welcome to another session about narrative structure, the paper 1 question 3 task. And for this presentation I'm going to be using the Alex Cold specimen paper, which is on AQA's secure portal. You might have used it before, be familiar with it and so on, but that is the extract that I'm going to be looking at in this session. This isn't the first video that I have done on structure. There are others that I have done, but in all of those videos I have included this list of 14 structural devices that are often useful to have in your arsenal of things that you can look out for, because they can apply to any extract that you get. For those of you that have done structure before, who have watched a video of mine before, will know that with structure, it's all about focus. It's all about shifting between different focuses or different foci. It's the idea of the writer's pen being seen as a bit like a camera, which is showing you different things for a particular reason in a particular order. So all of these things are to do with structure. I'm not going to go into them now because I'm conscious of time, but if you want to watch one of my other videos on structure, for example, the Introduction to Narrative Structure video, I will put the link to that in the description for this video. So that is a list of things that forms quite a good toolkit, I suppose, of possible devices that you can look out for when you are talking about structure. Something else which is in my other videos as well for structure is this spider diagram, which gives you in a nutshell really the crux of this question. So if I just go into this in a little bit more detail, so structure is all about how texts are constructed or put together. And we think of obviously structure to do with architecture, to do with the structure of DNA, to do with the structure of building a wall, for example. But when we talk about the structure of texts, what we talk about is how the paragraphs fit together. And when you put all those paragraphs together, it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. They all come together to form the extract as you read it chronologically. So two of the main keywords for structure is always going to be sequence and order. What is the order of events, and why does the writer tell you these events in this order? It's important to quote from the extracts. And for this question, you need to be able to have read the whole source. It's really important that you read the whole source because you need to know the flow of the extract. You need to know the beginning, you need to know the middle, and you need to know the end. So it's really important that even before you attempt to write question 3's response, that you see the extract as a whole, you see it from top to bottom. That is the only question, in fact, which will require you to do that, because questions 1, 2, and 4 are about particular sections. The question for structure will always be the same, which I'll go into in the next slide, and it's always going to be out of 8 marks, which means you should spend about 10 minutes on this question, or about 15 perhaps if you've got 25% extra time. Bullet points underneath the question will always be the same as well, and I'll talk about those in a second. And those bullet points are really helping you structure your response, because in 10 minutes you have to be realistic about what you can do. I always say to my students, you need to be writing about 2 paragraphs in total. One of those paragraphs is about the opening of the text, so in other words, the first paragraph, or maybe the first couple of paragraphs. And the second paragraph that you write is about the middle and or the end, and that shows the flow, because obviously the middle and the end comes after the before, or comes after the beginning. So 2 paragraphs, I would say. And what's really important for this question, because this is still an analysis question, is you have to ask yourself, why do you think the writer has told you the order of the story in this way? And what effect does it have on you? So the exam board often falls back on the word interest as a way of saying they want to know what the effect is on you. So what do you feel? And what is significant, I suppose, about being told this particular thing about the story at this particular point? If you have watched my introduction to structure video, you will know that this is about flowcharts, it's about arrows, it's about progressing one to next to next to next. So it's all a bit of a flowchart, really. And sometimes what can be helpful is to do a bit of drawing and to draw what you can see in the beginning, middle, and end to almost visually show you that if this was being filmed, the camera would be showing you different images in a particular order. Okay, and we'll do that in a second as well. So no surprise that the question is this: how is the text structured to interest you as a reader? That is the crux of this question. It's always the same. One of the things that I say to students is maybe think about rewording this question, because sometimes the idea of being interested by a text, for example, for those students that don't like reading, can be a bit of a task. So sometimes what I say to students is, if you ask yourself, why has the writer told you the story in this order, and what are the effects? Those two questions are the same, but it's just slightly more student friendly, perhaps. What the examiner doesn't want you to keep saying is, this interests me, this interests me, this interests me, because that is not what they're using that word interest there for. It's all about what are the effects of it. Interest we think of being something positive. When we're interested in something, we're really interested in it, and we're intrigued by it. But sometimes interest can also mean something that we're horrified by, or something that we find particularly disturbing, and that's another type of interest as well. The whole of the source at the top as well. And the bullet points there, I've crossed off the third one because it's unhelpful, really. It's not very specific. So the two top bullet points are the ones that are most useful. The first bullet point about the beginning, which is what your first paragraph is about, and your second bullet point, is about the second paragraph that you write, all about this idea of sources developing, all about this idea of focus changing, and that will be your second paragraph. So those two bullet points I find are the most useful for students. 8 marks, 10 minutes, 2 paragraphs. You can see I've got my little diagram there, reminding you of this idea of a flow chart. You move from paragraph to paragraph to paragraph, and as you do that in a chronological order, the text develops. It develops before your eyes. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. All these little jigsaw pieces come together to form the main picture, which is the extract that you read. So the Alex Cold extract is all about really a boy called Alex, and his mother, unfortunately, has, I think, been diagnosed with quite a serious illness. And we've got to, I suppose, work out how that is conveyed in terms of structure, but we've also got to work out, why has the writer opened the story in this way? What devices are being used in terms of structural devices? What has the writer done with sentences? Any particular use of symbol? How has the writer included dialogue in this? Is there external to internal shifts? All of this kind of stuff. So you can see, to save time, what I've done is I've got the extract, and I've also highlighted straight away what it is that you might want to draw upon in order to talk about the structure of this extract. So the first 15 lines I have called the beginning. So you get the little box at the top which tells you, to give you a helping hand, really, to introduce you to what the extract is about. So Alex Cold lives with his parents and 2 younger sisters called Andrea and Nicole in a small American town. But when his mother becomes ill, family life changes beyond recognition. So it's important to pay attention to that little box, actually, because it's been written there to help you. So I'm going to read out this extract, and then I'm going to go back to what we can talk about in terms of the structural devices. So it says, Alexander Cold awakened at dawn, startled by a nightmare. He had been dreaming that an enormous blackbird had crashed against the window with a clatter of shattered glass, flown into the house, and carried off his mother. In the dream, he had watched helplessly as it clasped her clothing in its yellow claws, flew out the same broken window, and disappeared into a sky heavy with dark clouds. What had awakened him was the noise from the storm, wind lashing the trees, rain on the rooftop, and thunder. He turned on the light with a sensation of being adrift in a boat, and pushed closer to the bulk of the large dog sleeping beside him. He pictured the roaring Pacific Ocean a few blocks from his house, spilling in furious waves against the rocks. He lay listening to the storm and thinking about the blackbird and about his mother, waiting for the pounding in his chest to die down. He was still tangled in the images of his bad dream. Alexander looked at the clock. 6:30, time to get up. Outside it was beginning to get light. He decided that this was going to be a terrible day, one of those days when it's best to stay in bed because everything is going to turn out bad. There had been a lot of those days like that since his mother got sick. Sometimes the air in the house felt heavy, like being at the bottom of the sea. At breakfast, Alex was not in the mood to applaud his father's efforts at making pancakes. His father was not exactly a good cook. The only thing he knew how to do was pancakes, and they always turned out like rubber tire tortillas. His children didn't want to hurt his feelings, so they pretended to eat them, but any time he wasn't looking, they spit them out. "When's Mama going to get better?" Nicole asked, trying to spear a rubbery pancake with her fork. "Shut up, Nicole," Alex replied. "Mama's going to die," Andrea nodded. "Liar, she's not going to die," shrieked Nicole. "You two are just kids. You don't know what you are talking about," Alex exclaimed. "Here, girls, quiet now. Mama is going to get better," his father interrupted, without much conviction. Alex was angry with his father, his sisters, life in general, even with his mother for getting sick. He rushed out of the kitchen, ready to leave without breakfast. Except for his father's pancakes and an occasional tuna and mayonnaise sandwich, no one in the family had cooked for months. There was nothing in the refrigerator but orange juice, milk and ice cream. At night they ordered in pizza or Chinese food. At first it was almost like a party, because each of them ate whenever and whatever they pleased, mainly sweets, but by now everyone missed the balanced diet of normal times. Alex had realised during those months how enormous their mother's presence had been, and how painful her absence was now. He missed her easy laughter and her affection, even her discipline. She was stricter than his father, and sharper. It was impossible to fool her. She could see the unseeable. He missed her music, her flowers, the once familiar fragrance of fresh-baked cookies, and the smell of paint. It used to be that his mother could work several hours in her studio, keep the house immaculate, but still welcome her children after school with cookies. Now she barely got out of bed to walk through the rooms with a confused air, as if she didn't recognise anything. She was too thin, and her sunken eyes were circled with shadows. Her canvases, which were once explosions of colour, sat forgotten on their easels, and her oil paints dried in their tubes. His mother seemed to have shrunk. She was little more than a silent ghost. Okay, so that is the extract. Quite a bleak, quite a sympathetic, I suppose, extract. It's obviously not a pleasant extract to read in terms of positive connotations. It's about something very real, which is the illness and possibly her ultimate death of his mother. And he's really struggling to come to terms with that. That is, in fact, the question for question 4 for this extract, that he's showing that he's struggling to come to terms with her illness. And I might do a separate video on that in future weeks, perhaps. So as I was reading that, you can see that I've already highlighted things, and I wrote down little annotations really about what I could talk about. So I've firstly split the extract into 3 sections, beginning, middle and end. So immediately the first sentence we get established straight away a sense of character, place and time. We know, for example, that the story is about a boy called Alex. We know that it's morning because he's just woken up at dawn, and we know that he is in America, and we know that it's as he says, it's going to be a bad day, and you can only say that in the morning. We also know that he has a nightmare, and it features this blackbird. And the higher level response would say that this blackbird becomes a motif or a symbol for his mother's death, because that blackbird is taking his mother off in the same way that death ultimately will. And in both regards, he's just stood there helplessly, can't do anything to stop it. As we progress into that second paragraph, we get told about the things that are going on outside. So we zoom into the bad weather. This paragraph is the focus of the language question. I did this in a previous video, actually. So this paragraph might be familiar to you if you've seen that video. So outside, it's really bad weather. You might say that's pathetic fallacy to show, the negativity and the foreboding sense of atmosphere that this extract creates. And then as we move into that third paragraph in the beginning, we have a couple of declarative sentences. He decided that it was going to be a bad day. We're not quite sure why until we get that second sentence, which is about his mother's illness, which introduces to us the topic of his ill mother, which really underpins the whole of this extract. That is the reason, really, for his anxiety, and the reason why he's probably looking at life in quite a cynical and pessimistic way. So that's the beginning. Then we progress into the middle, and as the text develops, we then have a shift in focus, and we move from his room, where he was sleeping, to the kitchen, where they are having breakfast. And his father, bless him, is trying to do his best by making these pancakes, but unfortunately they're awful. They don't taste very good, clearly not as good as his mother's pancakes. And then we shift from description to dialogue, because we go into the conversation that Nicole and Andrea are having. And because I think they're quite young sisters, they don't necessarily understand the tone at which they are talking about. So they're talking about it very kind of brutally almost. Mama's going to die. shrieked, Mama's going to die, Andrea added. Liar, shrieked Nicole. And Alex is kind of trying to separate himself from their conversation because he's older. He's trying to kind of see things in a slightly more mature way, I suppose. So that transition from description to dialogue shows us the dysfunctionality of their relationship at the kitchen table. Just because they're eating together doesn't mean they're enjoying being together. And then towards the end of that section, we zoom into the image of the fridge, which I found quite interesting actually, because inside that fridge it's full of quite, it's not proper food, I would say. It's kind of knickknacks, orange juice, milk, ice cream, not proper meals that you would need for proper eating. It becomes a novelty. Every kid from time to time would like to think they can live on ice cream, but it's the novelty of that which is appealing. After a week, they're probably sick to death of it. So they're not cooking properly, they're not getting the weekly shopping properly. They are living from hand to mouth, basically, with very poor food. And that's because their mother's illness and the fact she can't cook anymore has changed their eating habits. And Alex in particular is wishing that they could go back to his mother cooking when perhaps they had better food. And then we transition to the end of the extract, just one paragraph. And again, you wouldn't obviously quote all of this, but it was easier for me to block it out like this, that somewhere in that green section are the quotes that you could use to talk about flashbacks. So this extract ends with flashbacks that Alex is having, which help him compare and contrast how life used to be before his mother got ill to how life is now that she is poorly. And the way that's done is very like snapshots of lots of different separate images. So he sees her oil paints, for example. He sees the lack of flowers, or remembers her flowers she used to have. He remembers the cookies that she used to make as well. So lots of images really that he is remembering to help him remember how life has changed now that his mother has become probably bedridden and can't do these things anymore. And that's where I suppose the poignancy comes from in this extract. That juxtaposition between before and now is what's causing him to be quite melancholic or quite depressed or quite cynical, because he wishes he could go back and he just feels helpless. He can't do anything to help his mother. So that is the flow, that is the extract itself, and I've split it into beginning, middle, and end. So, like I said, what we can do is you can think about drawing the separate sections of this extract into the beginning, middle, and end. So we start with a storm and a blackbird, we then shift focus to the breakfast table and perhaps a fridge, and then we shift focus to all the little images that he sees, the flowers, the cookies, the paints, and how all her canvases and her oil paints have all started to dry because they're not being used anymore. So importantly, we can't just say for this question, we see this, then we see that, and then we see this, and quote things. We've got to think about why, and that's why underneath these images I've got that subheading why, because this is what you need to tie in order to get, more marks, at least more than 4 marks. So beginning introduces person, place, and time. It creates an ominous and foreboding mood through that declarative, it decided to be a terrible day. At that point, we don't quite know why. We don't quite know what's troubling Alex. That's told to us afterwards about his mother being ill. You could say the focus of the bad weather outside metaphorically represents Alex's troubled family life. Obviously, we go from inside to outside, so we go from an internal to external shift or an internal to external transition. It becomes apparent once we realise that the mother is ill that the nightmare has been inspired by his mum's illness. The blackbird becomes a symbol of death and taking his mother away, and he can't do anything to stop it. So clearly, his dream has been influenced by the reality of his life at the moment. And that's emphasised in that declarative, since his mother got sick, which introduces the main issue of this extract. Then we shift focus to the middle, the breakfast time with siblings. So we go from the transition from description to dialogue to show the fractured family conversation and his sister's quite tactless discussions about their mother. Alex, as the older sibling, is trying to distance himself from their kind of maybe quite immature discussions. The father is trying his best, but not really succeeding at cooking and things. And as we said, at the end of that middle section, the writer zooms into the fridge, showing how empty it is showing how the mother isn't kind of getting the food in anymore, cooking properly. They're kind of eating a lot of junk, basically. And then we shift to the end of the extract, and we've got lots of different snapshots, lots of different images to show the before and after of his mother's illness. So a series of flashbacks, that itself is a structural technique, and we zoom into different objects like flowers, cookies, and his mum's paints, because that acts as a device for Alex to see how his life has changed now that his mum has become ill. And not only the impact on him, but the impact on the house, but also the impact on the wider family as well. So you get the sense that the mother is the glue of this family. You know, the family rely on her to do all the minutiae, to do all of the mundane things, which they all come to rely on when it's dinner time and things. So that is the structure of this extract. And so seeing it in boxes can sometimes help this idea of transitioning from one focus to another. You can imagine if this was being filmed, you would see probably very similar images like this in this order. But importantly, what we've got to do is to think about, well, why is that significant? So I'm going to finish this PowerPoint with an example response. I've split it into 2 slides, a slide for each paragraph, to show you how you would put this all together. You might want to pause this video now before I show you that to have a go at writing it yourself, perhaps. Or not, you can keep watching and then write it afterwards once you've seen a model answer, I suppose. What I've also done is I've highlighted in red how we know that this is a structural response, because the bits in red show us that we're talking very much about the structural techniques that I showed you at the beginning in that list. So this is the first paragraph. At the beginning of the source, the writer establishes a sense of person, place, and time, which are important in introducing the content of the extract. The writer decides to describe Alex's nightmare to readers, in which he dreams of a blackbird who carries off his mother in its claws, and all he can do is watch helplessly. The writer then uses an internal to external shift by then focusing on the stormy weather outside which woke him up. The stormy weather could be seen as a metaphor for the ominous and foreboding sense of mood that Alex feels when he wakes up. This foreboding mood is created through 2 declarative sentences. He decided it would be a terrible day, and since his mother got sick, makes it clear that his nightmare has been informed by his mother's illness. The blackbird in his dream, a metaphor for death. In this sense, he is not only experiencing a nightmare in his sleep, but also when he is awake. So that's the first paragraph. That's using that first bullet point, talking about the first 3 paragraphs. Second paragraph, when we talk about the middle and the end. In the middle of the extract, the writer shifts focus to the breakfast table at which his 2 sisters are also sat. The transition from description to direct speech informs the reader that Alex has a fractious and dysfunctional relationship with his younger sisters. The dialogue also tells readers the younger sisters don't quite know how to deal with their mother's illness, shown through Shut Up Nicole and Liar, plus Alex's attempt to separate himself from their conversation. You 2 are just kids. It seems his sisters' tactlessness in discussing their mum's illness like this isn't helping Alex feel any better. At the end, the writer shifts focus to a series of flashbacks of all the things Alex associates with his mother: flowers, cookies, her paints. The writer zooming into all these different images act as a device for Alex to see how life has changed and the impact of her illness on the house, himself, and wider family. So that is a completed response. Now, obviously, that may look like a lot, but what I'm trying to do is show you what you need to do in order to, get level 3, level 4. And as you might expect, it's always quality, not quantity, of course, but part of that quality does come from writing enough, as you might expect. You can't just write a sentence and expect to get 8 marks, for example. So I've split it into 2 slides. The first paragraph, this one about the beginning, that first bullet point, and then the second paragraph about something at the middle and the end. And those red words show that we're talking about structure, this idea of focusing on different things, shifting focus, zooming in, transitions between things, and flashbacks and so on. So in summary then, that is another example of a structure response. You might now want to have a go at writing this yourself, using this video to help. But structure, remember, is all about putting the paragraphs together, talking about order and sequence, and importantly, what effect that sequence creates on us as readers. Thank you.